Hello, everybody. So I'm here with Lord Baldur. Did I get your name correct?
Yes. How's it going, guys?
All right. So originally on this channel, we're talking about the Creation Club or the new paid mod system. Now, to put some context into it, the Creation Club was created to make modders into professional developers. And in this sense, as a professional developer, it's no longer a mod, it's a DLC. At least that's the stance they're taking on it. And by selling us this official DLC, they have changed their whole plan now, and it looks like we are going to be getting paid mods simply in a different form, using semantics to call it something else. That's in the Skyrim community, that's in the Fallout 4 community, but Lord Baldur here comes from a different set of communities that actually have had paid modding in one form or another for a while, and then they're planning to implement even more. And I want Lord Baldur to talk on this topic. He actually approached me, and it sounds like something that might interest all of you guys. How's it going?
It's going good. So the thing about it is that I run a YouTube channel that deals with primarily flight simulator videos. And one of the things is that with the flight simulator genre, they have a ton of paid mods, and they aren't exactly cheap either. Like you could get a very realistic version of a Boeing 737. It'll cost you about $50. So the way that it is that you have some very expensive mods, and the flight simulating hobby, as much as I'd love a lot of people to get into it, can be very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Now, the game you are speaking of, I mean, there's several games, obviously, but
Right.
X-Plane was one of the ones you were talking about, right?
Right. So there are generally three main flight simulators, 3.5 flight simulators now for that I'm generally going to talk about. One of them is obviously X-Plane, X-Plane 11. This is a game or a flight simulator that is made by Llama Research. And what they did is that they always allowed people to make mods, and they always allowed them to charge it because they created this as a way to create a software for flight simmers, for flight schools or aircraft companies, things like that, to train real life pilots.
Okay, so in other words, because this was designed to be used by professional organizations, which would charge money to have access to their features, or should I
Right?
say, to their organization, it was implied in the licensing when you license out this software that it would be paid for. Like you would have to pay for access to it in some way, or something along those lines, a kind of resale market going on in that sense.
Not necessarily like that. The thing about X-Plane is that you have absolute control over your mods. You can make whatever you want, and you can charge whatever you want, and Laminar won't go after you for it. So it's a very free and open platform. It's not open source, but it is an open platform.
I see, that makes a lot of sense. Now, that stands in sharp contrast, of course, to the Skyrim and Fallout modding communities, where they gave you the dev tools and then promptly said, you shall not permit any kind of sale of these mods unless it's a part of an officially sanctioned thing. And then they showed the Steam agreement. And then in the new version of it, they just omitted that part entirely because
Well,
obviously, yeah.
that actually goes kind of similar to my next example, which is Eagle Dynamics. They're the
Okay.
creators of DCS World, and DCS World is a jet fighter simulator. The thing about that is that probably because there's a lot of multiplayer involved and a lot of multiplayer servers, they have very tight control of what kind of mods you can make.
Mm-hmm.
See, and whenever you do make a mod, you can post a mod for free, and they won't raise any eyebrows over it. But if you want to charge money for your mod, or even go so far as no, actually you can post planes for free, but the really good ones are ones you have to pay for. If you charge for your mod, you have to go through them, and it has to go through their store.
So they actually have a store for this particular sim.
Right. And currently, there's been a lot of controversy going on because they've really ramped up the amount of paid mods that you have,
Hmm.
such as they're currently, as you can tell, releasing a Normandy map. This is for various other mods that you can get, and this is how it kind of gets expensive.
Now, what is the I guess the real question is what separates an official DLC versus a mod? Like, were these made by the community or were they made by in-house developers?
Um, some of them are made by in-house developers, but a lot of them are made by independent developers, and a lot of them actually form companies. Another a good one is I forgot the name actually, kind of eludes me, but they created the F-86 and they also created the MiG-15 for DCS World. And basically, what happens is that when you allow people to create mods and to pay for the said mods
Hmm.
or DLC in that case, then you are going to get companies who specialize in that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's exactly what's going to happen with Bethesda,
Let me
but I can
um,
imagine that.
let me retread some previous ground here. Back when Quake was a big thing, id Software used to license out their intellectual property so that these people could make these modders. They more or less became pro, and if we scroll down here, it's actually, developed by Rogue Entertainment. And then there's another one that's Hypnotic, and so on. These developers that worked with id Software that weren't originally developers, they were just mod makers, but they incorporated so that they'd have, a corporate shield and whatnot, and they turned into a full-on development studio. And that's how these expansion packs became a thing. And that's how id Software ran their business model. Is if you wanted to do something for them, you proved that you could, with a mod, and they looked at you like, you can make a full campaign for us? And like, yeah, we're gonna form a company. And then, so once you're incorporated, go ahead and have a chat with us, and that's what they did. So
Right.
that sounds quite like what you're talking about.
Right. But I thought that with a lot of Quake mods, weren't there a lot of studios that made their own thing, not even tied to id?
There were a lot that did that, and like Abyss of Pandemonium, I believe, was one of them, where they charged for their package and never consulted id. I believe there was a legal dispute regarding that at some point. But
Right. But
this
you also,
this on the other hand is very much, official. It's on Steam. It's actually, id Software acted as publisher for their work, and so it's very different as opposed to these groups that just, modded and then published their stuff in a big compendium like the ftp.cdrom.com packages that used to run around for free or for $3 or $4 back in the day.
well, the first thing that really comes to my mind is Heretic, which I believe was made by the Doom engine.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe that they really went through id to create that game, did they?
All right, this is Heretic. Heretic was made by Raven Software with id Software as publisher. Raven Software, I believe, would go on to make a Quake 4.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
they also made Prey, didn't they?
They made Jedi Outcast.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, yeah. So, any question about their legitimacy? They made Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy, Hexen. Singularity is lol. But my point is that this is a legitimate studio. They may have had humble origins, but ultimately
Right.
Heretic. id Software was very good about partnering with small companies in order to get stuff done. And now under the Zenimax family, they don't have to do that anymore. In fact, Zenimax pretty much tells them what to do. But
Right.
but in the past, they didn't have to do any of that. They were actually just we're impressed by your mod. In the case of Desolation of Eternity, anyway, we were impressed by your mod. Can you make this into a full thing? And they said yes, and that's pretty much how it worked back in the day.
that would make sense. I mean, one of the things that I noticed is that developers are getting more and more tied into their publishers' marketing departments, and they seem to
Mm-hmm.
have a lot more sway with the product than, in my opinion, they should.
Yes. It used to be. It used to be about the art, and it very much became about, it's always been about the money to a certain degree, but if you could make good art while you were making the money, all the better.
Right.
And now it's just becoming about the money more than anything else.
Right, and I do notice that more the recent games that come out, I do notice the good intentions of the developers, and they do a really good job at it. But it's very obvious to see various marketing decisions. I mean, I honestly believe a good one is the simplifying or dumbing down of recent Bethesda games, Fallout 4, for example.
Lowest common denominator, we need to expand our user base as large as possible. So, if someone finds this mechanic a little obtuse, a little difficult to get into, we need to have a waypoint indicator telling you exactly how to get there. And you know what? When I actually said, this is kind of for stupid people, I got an onslaught of, well, after I've been working for 40 hours, I don't want to come home and have a confusing game. That's usually one side of it, or how dare you call us little kids? Obviously that side. But
Right.
what it, I mean, when you're looking at what they have to offer, it just it reminds me very much of what EA is doing. EA is focusing on sports. People don't realize just how much EA is focusing on sports. It's they used to be EA Sports, but what they're doing, every E3 now is they're getting bigger and bigger with their football games, their FIFA, their things like that, and they're doing that for a reason. They're focusing on these things not because they are exceptionally good or they enjoy doing them. It's because they know that there is a large contingent of folks who wouldn't even think about playing a video game,
Uh-huh.
but then they like sports. So let's get them into this sports game. And that's how they did it. That is how they got people into the sports game.
Right, and that makes sense, but it is one of those, now that you mention it, kind of situations, because I didn't even notice that they were paying attention to sports until you brought it up. It's like, okay, that explains all the new NBA games, all the new NFL games,
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
Yeah, it's just their way of hooking on, like they're trying to grab a piece of the market that they don't already own. You see, they figure that they only need to spend a minimum amount of money on an Assassin's Creed. I mean, that's Ubisoft, but my point is that each company only needs to spend a specific amount of money on each demographic. Don't think of people as individuals with their own wants or needs. Think of them as blocks that can be addressed with marketing. And that's how it works is you aren't a person, you are a part of block B or a part of block C. And by doing
You're
that,
you're a dot in the scatter plot.
yes, yes. But that's how it works. And so, when someone gets confused or otherwise, they're just not happy with the way a game's going. Well, we can address this, and this portion who got turned off by our games will suddenly find this super intuitive, super easy to use. What you call the dumbing down, the streamlining, is actually done to facilitate this lowest common denominator.
Right. And the thing is that to play the devil's advocate, it does work. I mean, Skyrim is hands down their most successful game,
That's
and I
right.
think unless Fallout overtook them, but
No.
yeah, okay,
I mean, Fallout was extremely successful in terms of profit to cost, but that's because they pretty much reused the Skyrim engine. And a lot of people don't realize that this is just a DirectX 11 variant of the Skyrim engine. You can go and type in help space Brahmin or help space meat space 4 into the command console. You'll get alchemy ingredients listed. And this is in Fallout 4. That's because it's the same goddamn engine, and all your food are alchemy ingredients. It says alk, and you're like, why is all the food alk? Because it's alchemy. And then it
Right.
turns out like they reuse the code for the dragons. That's how the vertibirds work. They're using dragon flying code from Skyrim.
Right. Well, I'm actually kind of glad that they're reusing the engine
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise that would just be a financial headache for them.
Well, yes and no. The problem is that ultimately, uh, back in Morrowind, we used Gamebryo. They updated Gamebryo to a new version, added in Speed Tree and Havoc physics that plugged them in, and bam, you've got Oblivion. Well, then they threw out the scripting engine, recoded a bunch of stuff, renamed the engine the Creation Engine, and then they added in a Papyrus virtual machine to handle all the scripts in the background. And now we have something called Skyrim, which is using this creation engine. They simply ported the creation engine over, but they haven't actually developed a new engine since X Engine. X Engine was terrible. So like it's a good thing that they're licensing Gamebryo still in some form. You know, they may have bought it out and renamed it, but it's still Gamebryo at its core.
Right. But it is kind of an interesting thing to think about if they're allowing this game engine to become more public.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the biggest issue with paid mods and whatnot has to do with copyright. I mean, a good example would be Sky Oblivion. I mean, this guy is just one mistake away from a lawsuit,
Yeah.
essentially, and that's a very far cry from, let's say, X-Plane, where the guy allows you to do whatever you want. And the thing is, though, is that depending on what you do with that copyright, you can do a lot with that engine. You can go so far as to create new games, publish new games.
Have you played Arctwind, Narim, or Enderil?
I always wanted to, but I never really had the time.
If you have no time for anything else, just copy, get a fresh installation of Skyrim, pure, unedited, and install Enderil into it. If you need to just, put a dash in front of your Skyrim directory, to back it up, and then re-download Skyrim as a fresh one, do that. Enderil it uses the same assets as Skyrim,
Right?
but clearly they put those assets to work in a better way. Don't go into it expecting to play on very hard because that's just kind of dumb. Just play it on normal, enjoy it on normal because it's balanced for that.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean the storyline's better, the mechanics are better, there's a lot of rewards for exploration. For example, there are these little things called frost caps, which or frost claws that you can go around collecting, and they're little mushrooms. Every time you find one, and they're usually hidden around corners and on ledges and stuff, you get +1 to your carry weight. And so it just, there's like 300 of them hidden around the whole world. And so, little perks to exploring. In addition to this system, where if you want to try to heal, for instance,
Uh-huh.
healing is best done by sleeping in an inn. And like, well, why not just go cast a healing spell? Well, there's a thing called Arcane Fever. And if you use a healing potion or cast a healing spell, it gets worse, and it can kill you. So you have to use these draughts that will reduce your fever, and it's a core mechanic to Enderil. I was about to say Narim because again, Arctwind for Morrowind, Narim for Oblivion, and then Enderil for Skyrim. Each one is a sequel to the previous one. It's a flowing storyline, but you can get in at any point and just have fun.
Yeah, and it also makes you wonder, and this is kind of the argument for the paid mod. It's like
Hmm.
these guys should be a development studio. I
They
mean, if they make
actually
such a
are.
good game,
They literally have their own offices and everything, but it's
right?
based on donations and advertising revenue that they get on small things. I hear at least. I hear like
Right.
they don't actually get paid on their work, and they should. They really should.
I know, and it is one of those things, and I definitely should grab it while it's free. Have they?
Hmm.
brought up the idea of charging people for that mod, or is it still free?
It's still free. They haven't brought up the concept of charging anyone because since Morrowind, it's always been in the EULA that you will not allow it to be charged for. Now, it's the Creation Club actually does state in their thing that I'm trying to find it right here. It says I actually think it's a old property. This guarantees that are together. We've encountered many issues in this before. Yes, we won't allow any existing mods to be retrofitted into the Creation Club. It all must be original content. That's because communities have something known as, well, humans in general have something known as loss aversion. They hate the concept of having something taken away from them, something that they already had. So when the original paid mod system came up and people took their mods down off the Nexus and started putting them up as paid mods, people reacted really badly to that.
Oh yeah.
And so that's this concept. I think Midas Magic was the most egregious of that, because what he did is he kept his version on the Nexus and then put up a paid version which added like 4 new spells, and then he put in the old version. He updated the old version to have random pop-ups. There was like a 0.5% chance every time you casted one of the Midas Magic spells, a pop-up that would say, buy the full version. Well, when you're using, just spells rapid fire, you'd get those like twice a minute or something. It's like, yeah. And
wow.
Oh, no, get this. Hold on a second.
Oh, that's the kind of shit that bugs me to no end.
Yeah. It's Midas Magic Steam Workshop. And then I know there's a special one because it's Midas Magic free version. It's around here somewhere. Hold on. Okay. I found the Midas Magic, the one that's the real one. I'm trying to find it. Here it is. Let's see. Hold on. Midas Magic pop-ups. I think it's this one right. Here we go. So someone took that that original concept and retrofitted Midas Magic to say a Nigerian prince needs your help and things like that. Discover this way a housewife turned iron into gold. Alchemists hate her. Punch the troll. So on. It's just this is these drugger ladies are dying to meet you, and so on. But so someone took the concept of Midas Magic, the way and they reinserted the pop-ups just the way the guy had them, and put his own custom advertisements just to laugh at how terrible it was. Because this guy legitimately took all his custom spells and added pop-ups to the free version. Buy the full version on the Nexus or the Steam Workshop.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just comedic gold, though.
Yeah.
Though I am actually, it is one of those things where it is annoying. Like, if you have a free version and you always get interrupted by saying buy the premium version, well, fuck you.
Yes. So we were talking about how this one company, I was looking at these Steam incompatible. That looks terrible. That just looks awful. Like, all these are Steam incompatible.
Right. So there's a little bit of a backstory to it. So DCS World is on Steam, and it's a one-way road, actually. You can buy a game off of Steam, and it'll work for the DCS World launcher. But you can't buy a game off of Eagle Dynamics' website or any other licensed distributor and put it on Steam.
That's right.
So one of the things is that since they've really started to ramp up the DLC, paid missions used to not be a thing. They almost always used to be free. Paid campaigns, I should say. if you actually look at it, it's mostly aircraft that you sell. But the thing is, though, is that since they have so many, odds are they probably have some issues with trying to get it all onto Steam, maybe
Yeah,
licensing.
I could see that.
Right, but if you were to look at the Steam website for DCS World, they do have the aircraft modules there for the most part.
All right, so with DCS World, if we look down here, yes, they're definitely selling these. I'm getting Star Citizen flashbacks already.
Right, so there's a lot of content, and if you look at the prices, each one of those that you get, you're paying for a different aircraft. So let's say that you learn how to fly, well, the Mi-8, for example. Okay, so you fly it, you're into helicopters, and you go on to decide to, you want to buy the Huey. All right, well, now you don't know how to fly it, so there's an issue with investment. How much time do you have on your hands to learn these modules, and would you like to be a jack of all or a master of one?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, though, is that I imagine with Skyrim or the Creation Engine, you're not going to have that issue unless you do something ridiculous like what Kingdom Come is doing and, well, create a realistic kind of battle simulator.
I'm thinking immediately of Skydive Prepare to Cry, and there was a package that someone made. It wasn't exactly Skydive Prepare to Cry; it was something else.
Right.
But what they did was they combined attack commitment, where if you attacked, you were essentially lunging forward. You couldn't, you couldn't pan your camera left or right when you're attacking. It's attack commitment. So they coupled that with the TK dodge, where you could double tap to roll out of the way. So,
Uh-huh.
enemies will lunge at you, you roll out of the way, get behind them, stab them. It turns it into a somewhat Dark Souls-esque experience. I say somewhat because it's Skyrim. Either
Right.
way, a funny thing, if you want to piss off a Dark Souls fan, hold on a second. It's called Games Like Dark Souls. Yes, if you want to really, really piss off a Dark Souls fan, just look no further than Games Like Dark Souls in Google,
Oh,
and Skyrim comes up right here. Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah.
That'll piss them off. But my point here is that you can use mods to simulate that Dark Souls experience a little bit, and people are skeptical on that, and I understand why.
And well, that's the thing is that it does kind of leave a bitter taste in your mouth, thinking, okay, we have all these mods, now you have to pay for them. I mean, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm.
But strangely enough, that has happened for quite a while. And speaking of which, going back into the original discussion, the third game I did want to mention was Flight Simulator 10. That one
Okay.
was interesting because with Flight Simulator 10, obviously it was made by Microsoft, and they've always been okay with modding. But the thing is that in 2009, after the recession, they pretty much and what's the best word to? Oh yeah, they booted out the Aces company, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why. Because at the time, that was one of their best selling games from Microsoft. But needless to say, once they did that, they essentially gave zero fucks about their property.
Well, I know that Asheron's Call, they sold the turbine, and there's all these other situations where Microsoft held these properties, and
Right.
they said, no, developer, you own it. We don't want to own this anymore. We'll still publish for you if you want, but that's a separate business arrangement. We don't want financial responsibility for you. That's what they pretty much said as far as games go at one point.
Right. Right. But as a result, all of a sudden you had people who started to create these mods, and there's a huge community that built around it. Like you have studios that make it. You actually have development companies, PMDG, for example. They were actually licensed by Boeing to create realistic flight sims for it's playing or for Flight Simulator 10. So there's this huge community that was built on Flight Simulator just because Microsoft gave zero fucks about it.
Okay. That makes sense. So mods were created, they were bought, they were sold, and no one sought legal action because the property wasn't something they felt they had to defend.
Right. It could also be a case where they always allowed it because I'm not entirely sure if there were paid mods before they got rid of the Aces team, but after they got rid of it, that's when the product really started to see paid mods.
Well, I think someone put up a video recently about, do you have a great fan project? Then shut the fuck up about it. And he does this whole thing. Like, have I heard about your brand new fan project that's under production? Then you've already screwed up. Like,
Right.
you
Well,
know,
here's the thing: if you were to scroll down on that Steam page, you'll take a look at all the DLC that Dovetail has, and now scroll down further. All right, now expand that.
yeah.
Keep scrolling.
Yep.
Like the amount of modding that comes from from FSX is so ridiculous. It's not even funny. So if you want,
I'm gonna add all the DLCs to my cart.
knock yourself out. It's not my money.
Okay. There we go. I'm not actually going to do this transaction, but stupid things I will sometimes like, this is $100. I'm like, okay. And people be like, why would you do that? I'm gonna make a video about it and then I'm gonna get my money back. You know, I will do that sometimes, but it's I need to explain this to people. And I explained it while I was playing Star Citizen in order to try it out. My purchasing of something is not a tacit endorsement of whatever I purchased. I can deduct it off my taxes. You can't. That's just the reality.
Oh, and that tax deduction is beautiful if you're a YouTuber. Got to admit.
So I understand where this is going because you've got the Creation Club, which, they're trying to go official with this. They're trying to turn all the mods into these official DLC. And you've got the companies, which already put forth a ton of official DLC on their own. So
Right.
it's, it's a system where they're obviously trying to exploit it. What would you say is the most egregious form of it? Like, where do you think they might run into trouble?
I think the biggest issue that they have is how much they allow their these mod developers to create. Because if they are very loose about it, then you could essentially create an entire industry off of this one creation engine alone. You can create numerous games, numerous mods, numerous studios. The limits are really endless. The problem is, though, is that I don't think Bethesda is going to go that route. They might have games, but it's probably going to be published through them. And they might not even have that, and that would be the biggest thing. Because copyright, it does kind of go again. I understand why copyright exists. I understand why you need to protect your creative property. But the thing is, though, is that if you were to restrict what people can mod and charge, then you're just limiting what they can create. And that would be a sad waste and a very big potential, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I've looked at, what they're proposing anyway. And this stuff is laughable. A lot of it comes from their previous games. Crab Armor was literally a joke that the community put forth when Skyrim was originally released. They said, "Look at our the first DLC for Skyrim announced," and the satirical site put forth the Crab Armor, and the first thing they show at E3 when they're announcing the Creation Club is the same, not the exact same Crab Armor, but Crab Armor. Satire becomes reality.
Right. Well, I imagine they're trying to laugh at themselves, but there are some situations where you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Being self-deprecating might save your own feelings, but then it actually, whether or not they're actually being self-deprecating, it for appearance sake, it looks like they're out of touch. That's what it looks like. It looks like they're playing into, you know, not intentionally. They're playing into all of the things everyone said. This is so dumb. So that's,
Well,
yeah.
I'm leaning towards the idea that it is because they know that the horse armor didn't work.
The
People
horse
absolutely hated it.
horse armor still being sold on the Microsoft Store for the Xbox version of Oblivion, which has been ported to the Xbox One, which means you too can buy a glorious horse armor that doesn't actually have any stat effects. So, yeah, there we go. No. But getting back to this, I'm not actually against the Creation Club in concept. That's what a lot of people seem to be confused about. Like, there's a reason why I keep talking about, the way id Software used to license out their property, because these are some of my favorite adventures, both the Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake, modules that people made and sold. I'm absolutely fine with this. However, I need to know, number one, that the developers are getting compensated properly. I have a feeling that what's actually going to happen here is that they're going to pay people a minimal amount based on milestones, like an unsustainable amount where you could not make a living doing this, and they'll pay them on the alpha, beta, and full release. At least that's what I think. Now, nothing official has been announced, but that's what someone who was intimate with the project told someone else, and whether that's true or not, it was true back then, might not be true now, I don't know. But the whole idea of full internal dev cycle includes localization, polishing, testing. This is something that if they're serious about, will actually be very good and will make them tons of money. Even if it isn't very good, even if they do a terrible job, because they're planning on building most of this in-house and then occasionally licensing out to modders. As long as they have console users to buy the stuff, specifically PS4 users. Have you heard about the modding situation on PS4?
Um, I'm actually pretty out of touch with that. Last time I checked, they were saying, no, we're not going to have any mod.
Well, PS4 gets mods, but no external assets. What that means is if you want to change a vendor's price, you can do that. If you want to change a weapon's damage, you can do that. But if you want to have a new armor or a new weapon type, anything that uses a new graphics, sound, or texture, can't do it.
I'm actually trying to figure out why they are having such a huge stranglehold on that.
Well, okay, so when you develop for the PlayStation 4, you have to sign their very comprehensive developer agreement. And you have a PlayStation developer license. Now, they gave those out willy-nilly to a bunch of indie developers, but they then tightened their restrictions again. And so, if you do not have a PlayStation developer's license, you cannot develop for PlayStation. You cannot, publish anything. And Bethesda wanted to take all of the responsibility off of themselves originally in the paid mod system and in the regular mod system. They wanted to say, yeah, we're hosting these mods, but they're not really ours. It's like G2A. The way G2A says, we're not really selling these keys. We're just acting as a site where these keys are sold. It's a similar situation where we own the house, you use the house, but we don't have any responsibility for what goes on in it.
All right, so eventually they become the eBay of DLC.
That was the original concept. Now, how it's actually going to turn out, we don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah. And that's the biggest concern, is that I do think that the way Bethesda has been going, I think that in one way or another they could really fuck this up, because it seems like they want a lot of control over this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, their name was dragged through the dirt. It got to the point where Valve, the people who actually have Steam Greenlight and now Steam Direct, where they literally just let anything on their platform, they were saying, hey, this is a liability. Like, your system here, non-curated, nothing on Steam isn't curated in some way. We pride ourselves on curation. When you came to us, Bethesda Softworks, you told us expressly that there be no curation and it's a deal breaker, and we kind of shook our heads all right at the time, but we're looking back on it now, how our brand's been tarnished, how your brand's been tarnished as a result of this, and we just think we need to kill this deal. And both companies agreed at that point that they needed to kill the deal. That's why the paid mod system originally went away. It was because the people they were selling it to were so hostile to them, and then there were other people who were taking mods, stealing them, putting them up, and these stolen mods they were selling, they were actually going to get paid on, and it's just the legal liabilities in it were colossal. So
Oh, I bet.
with this, since everything has to go through a development pipeline, there's multiple checks, and their lawyers can vet things. Vet means investigate to discover.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's why they want control over it, because the last time when they tried to just create an open marketplace, it didn't work out very well.
Yeah, which is kind of a sad thing, but it's weird that kind of being brought up. And the way that I mean that is that for the most part, gamers really haven't had to experience what paid mods are like.
Mm-hmm.
In the flight simulating community, that's not the case. It slowly started to ease in, and then once it finally did, well, I guess the best way to put it is that it stopped becoming a pastime and it started to become a hobby. And what I mean by that is that a hobby is something you have to sink time into. It's something you have to sink money into. It's something you don't just do every once in a while. It's a hobby. It's your passion.
No. The huge difference, but like a pastime would be if I were to buy a train set and run it around my house. A hobby is where I not only buy a train set, but I buy a high quality electronic locomotive that can respond to digital signals around the track. And then I take it to a club and say, I want to be a member. Here is my $8,000 locomotive.
Right.
That's a pass. That's a hobby where, like, can I help you guys, build up your railroad, and then I'll run my train on it, and like, it's a mutually beneficial thing. You see, that's what the railroad club did, and it was. I'm just trying to say that you went from just running it around your house as a pastime to working on it as a hobby, and you actually you got to get the railroad looking nice so that you can do presentations, so that you can bring money in for the club, because you bring money in for the club can then afford better stuff for the railroad. And so it becomes not a job, because you can't support yourself with it, but the hobby becomes self-sustaining at the very least.
Right. And maybe that's how the industry can go. But as I said, it all depends, because I think the more freedom these developers have, the bigger the industry can get.
That's right. This very much looks to me very different from the paid mods you're talking about in the flight simulator community. This looks to me like they just want to make money off of, again, the PS4 users and anyone else who would buy these things they produce in-house. And if they can get someone else to contract, cheap labor, as it were, they'll do that.
Right. And that could very well be the case. The parallel that I was thinking of is that they're doing the exact same thing that DCS World is. Very in-house, very controlled on what you can and can't publish. And as a result, Well, in the case of Eagle Dynamics, you do have a bit more quality control, but I'm not entirely sure if Bethesda would do the same thing.
Okay.
And quality control doesn't always mean a bad thing, or doesn't always mean a good thing. I
Mm.
mean, yeah, you can definitely get quality products, but it prevents a lot of people from publishing their own, which may actually be diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of situations. Warframe is a good example. It is a paid mod system where people develop the 3D models or the digital effects or things for weapons or cloaks or other parts of the warframes.
Right?
And then the actual company, Digital Extremes, will come to the will look at their workshop page and see, okay, this one is the most popular, we'll review it. So they review the most popular one, and they will actively delete entries where they see, oh, this has a broken mesh, or this, like this 3D model just kind of looks janky when you rotate it around. They will actually investigate and curate these things. And you'd be surprised how many things are extremely popular, top of the list, but after the company examined them, rejected them due to quality defects or differences in the style by which they want to run the game.
Right. And it kind of reminds me of that one incident where on the App Store, they got rid of the Civil War game. Not because of any issue with quality, but because of the Confederate flag, and they didn't believe that video games were a form of art. So can
Yeah,
it?
it's. I mean, that's crazy. There are games on the App Store with the swastika because you're killing Nazis. So it's it doesn't make any sense. That
Well, couldn't you apply the same logic to say, no, yeah, you're killing those treasonous Confederates?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say is that the inconsistency is insane. And
Right.
I find it's very very common, and those social issues, the hypocrites who want to bring about an iconoclasm where they destroy symbols, they don't realize that when you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. And
Right.
I think that that's a discussion best left for another topic.
Right. I will say this, though. One of my favorite quotes from George Carlin is that symbols are best left for the simple minded,
Okay.
which, to me, symbols don't mean much. I understand they could be of importance, but either way, it doesn't really offend me. And I don't see
Whereas
why that goes.
I study symbolism um,
Right.
for literature, and it's something I would say that symbolism is useful in the
Uh
sense
huh.
of conveying hidden messages,
Right.
but at the same time, uh, trying to destroy an idea is one of the
Uh huh.
stupidest things you can ever do, because you get
Right.
this on the internet, especially you get the Streisand effect. Have you heard of that?
Yes, it's when you want something to be hush hush, but in doing so, it blows up in your face.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I acted as the agent by making several videos that people did not want to have made, but
Uh,
yeah, I feel a compulsion to when people are like, "Don't talk about this." I'm like, "Really? This affects tons of people, you know?"
yeah. In that case, I'm going to say, fuck you. I'm going to talk about it.
Exactly.
Right.
But rotating back around to this, is there any other uh, aspects of paid modding that you want to talk about as far as the flight simulator community goes, or comparing it to this?
Right. I guess the point to really take home is that when you have paid mods, you have the potential to create things that are incredibly amazing. You're no longer restricted, where you're some college kid who has to go through classes and is going through this full-time job, and then can only dedicate 2 or 3 hours at a time to their day, and that's probably going to be done playing video games instead of developing. It kind of really cuts down on the quality of what you can work on. But if you were to get a studio and actually dedicate time, as I said, the possibilities are limitless. The issue here, though, is that it's very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've seen it, $3,000 for just what Dovetail allows to be published via Steam. I
That's
mean,
right.
that's probably less than 1% of how many paid mods are out there in the real world for Flight Simulator.
Mm-hmm.
It can get to a ridiculous point, and I imagine that there's inevitably going to be an issue with consolidation, where you have more companies than people, and therefore some of them are going to get swallowed up by the larger companies.
Possibly, but
Right.
there are the one-offs. They produce something that they think is great, and no one looks to acquire their properties, so the companies simply die. Now, you wonder what happens when a company dies. Normally their holdings would get freed up. However, because they're acting through a publisher, be it Bethesda Softworks, be it the flight simulator company, ultimately the properties will rest with the publisher. And so these companies will disappear, and their work will still get sold.
Right. Well, is there a case where the developer has the rights to develop the game and the publisher does not? They just have the rights to publish it. So you have a lot of companies that could sit on a. Does that happen?
That happens a lot, but
Right.
not in the AAA space. And also, it has to be negotiated before the game is ever developed. It's a difficult thing, because for the most part, when a publisher puts forth money, they
Uh-huh.
own the game, or they own the intellectual property. But it all
Right.
comes down to the contract you sign. I mean, I've I've gone over and renegotiated contracts several times in my lifetime, where you'll have to change this, and then
Mhm.
I'll do I'll do a check. I'll do a document comparison. I'll be like, you changed this, but you also changed that. Get rid of that. And
Right.
negotiating contracts is a pain in the ass, especially when people try to are actively trying to deceive you, which I find is more often the truth than not.
Right. Well, the thing about contracts is that, the way I see it is that it could take a month for you to read, but you need to read through it fully to
Absolutely.
really understand what's going on. And I guess the best way to put it, though, is that I can imagine that there has to be some companies where the publisher doesn't have the right to create a new IP, but the company or the developer is no longer working out of business,
Mm-hmm.
so they have no choice but to sit on it. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, that does happen though. I mean, where the developer goes out of business, and
Right?
then sometimes the publisher doesn't have the rights to publish it anymore. Their contract expires, so the whole property just kind of floats in limbo. And people ask, well, isn't the public domain? Technically not, because it rests with the author, but the author is the company and the company's gone. Yeah, so it reverts to the owner of the company. But didn't the owner of the company sell off their assets? Well, who'd the company sell their assets to? And you see how it becomes a clusterfuck, trying to
Right.
figure out who actually owns the intellectual property rights. And very often you'll get very large companies, like, say, Fox, for instance, which will just assume that they have the rights, and when they don't, and they get taken to court, and very quickly court costs get paid for the guy who was taking Fox to court, because um, it turns out that Fox didn't have those rights. Warner Music Group was a very interesting case with the Happy Birthday song.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I do remember that one.
the Happy Birthday song, turns out they could not prove where they bought the rights from. They could prove they owned the rights via a bill of sale, but when they followed it back, like, who did the guy who sold it to them got it from? Because he wasn't the author either. So, like, if you can't trace it back to its point of origin, you cannot prove that it wasn't stolen at some point, down the line. You have to have
Right.
documentation going back to something's origin. And in this case, they didn't have it, so Happy Birthday fell into the public domain.
Right. And the thing about it is that if you have something that, well, if you were to take some to court, the legal fees are very expensive.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, it really is a rich man's game when you talk about lawsuits.
It
And
really depends because for
well,
one thing, the number one thing is you need to know what you're doing. Okay, there are
yeah,
people who have lost lawsuits before they even began because they thought they could represent themselves, and they pigeonholed themselves into a specific defense where they couldn't actually argue against the person taking them to court because they stated a specific defense and they didn't actually word their documents properly. So that's why for the most part a lawyer is necessary. However,
right,
at the same time, um, let's put it like this: the favor very often sits with the person initiating the lawsuit. That's why when people sue large companies, more often than not, the large companies settle.
right,
Whereas, the other way around, the common citizen tends to get smashed when a common citizen gets sued by a large company.
right. And that actually happens a lot with patent trolls, I know,
Mm-hmm.
because generally what they do is that they patent a vague ass code.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, for example, X-Plane was sued because they used a password that was universal for Android devices.
Yes.
I think that's what it was. But needless to say, what they will do is that they will sue you, and then they will sue you over something that's very vague that they have the rights to, and then they will ask a monetary amount that isn't enough for them to fight it at court. So it's almost always settled outside of court.
Mm-hmm. You know,
And the same,
yeah, I've seen stuff like that happen. Absolutely.
right? And the funny thing is that, well, not really funny, but Unilock was a company that sued X-Plane, and they also sued Microsoft for a very vague piece of code that they decided to randomly buy the rights to. Microsoft didn't bother saying, fuck it, I'll just hand you the money, and that kind of set a very bad precedence.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But unfortunately, that has very little to do with this because I don't honestly think there'll be a lot of copyright trolling here in terms of like a paid mod system. Unless of course you owned a specific patent to a specific plane. So I mean, replicating a Boeing, for instance, that's owned by Boeing. So you have to
Yeah.
you have to question these things about what rights do you have, to replicate someone else's intellectual property, especially if it's patented.
Well, more and more recently, aircraft manufacturers have actually gone after certain companies and then putting out cease and desist. Boeing is actually becoming more stringent on that. They
Mm-hmm.
prefer you only to publish it through PMDG and or only have PMDG develop it. Airbus, I don't think is that stringent. You have Jar Design, you have Aerosoft, all of them make Airbus products, but it really depends on the company. To me, though, I mean, if I was an aircraft manufacturer, I'd like to get my product out as much as I can, especially if I'm like a small single-engine plane developer
Well, yeah, I mean,
that can actually,
if you're the equivalent of a startup, then you very much need to get that free advertising.
right,
You make your own 3D model of it and pitch it like, "Hey, I've created this new plane. I'm willing to toss it for free into your package. You want to sell it? Go ahead and sell it. As
right,
long as we get the advertising, keep the name the same, and you can do whatever you want with it." Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
But the thing is, though, is that if you have an airline with an accounting department that you spend tens of millions of dollars on figuring out, okay, what is the best bang for your buck aircraft? You're not
Mm-hmm.
just going to, sit down on your computer, look at an advertisement for Boeing. It's like, yeah, you know what? I think that Airbus purchase was a bad idea. Let me just No, but
No, no, no.
in a case of a company like Cessna or Piper, I can imagine that being, they'd probably want to get their product out more because there are a lot of private pilots out there, and if they can't buy a plane themselves, then you'll have a group of pilots that'll purchase it
Yeah, no, no.
to share it.
I've seen the concept of leased aircraft and
Right.
aircraft that are like a holding company will buy 4 or 5 aircraft, and then they will lease it out to various pilots and things like that. I've seen that happen. So yeah, the pilot can't afford to own the plane, but if he pays it, a fraction at a time, and then has a 5 year lease, and then the lease rolls over to the next pilot, and so on. They're able to not only make up for the fact they bought the plane, but they're able to make a profit on it. I've seen holding companies do that before.
Yeah, and actually, holding companies are pretty big, even in the airline industry. So that's what a lot of them tend to do. I
Yeah.
think it's another discussion for another day, but
Yes.
airlines do lease planes.
Absolutely. Anyway, just the way I want to conclude this, more or less, is that the flight simulator community shows us that paid mods aren't necessarily terrible. I mean, no one wants to pay for something that was previously free. However, it needs to have the quality. It
Right.
really needs to have the quality to
Yeah.
to show for it. And again, like what they demoed, the tunnel snake's jacket and the red pit boy. Don't know. Just don't know.
Right. Well, that's just things that they showcased. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be up to the developers to develop something
Yes.
good.
Well, they've got an internal support studio that's going to be producing some of this content. They've also got they have tons of submissions. They actually have a list of modders that they consider to be high profile. I know any Scion or whatever his name is. He's the guy who's done Apocalypse Ordinator, stuff like that. He's on that list, but none of these people can make mods that break the game's rules in any way. Every single mod that is made through this as official DLC needs to operate like official DLC. It needs to actually, so that crab armor needs to work with that helmet, needs to work with that shield, needs to work with that jacket. If you were to purchase every single thing on their store, none of it can conflict. Period.
And I think that might actually be the Achilles heel of this concept.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, because it does limit what you can do, and they might change it down the road. But I actually hope that they would actually allow for people to publish their own games.
Yeah, I don't see them doing that right now, although if somebody who has made 3 or 4 things says, hey, I'm getting with this person, with that person, with that person, let's make a game, would they support it? I can't say. I don't know if they
Right?
take them seriously yet. Now, according to Pete Hines, who he's terrible on Twitter, at least he has been in the past. He said, these aren't paid mods. These are we're giving these modders a chance to become professional developers, and so that's the attitude here is that modders are people who make these free things, and if you want to be respected, then you need to join the Creation Club and be a actual professional developer. That's their point of. That's how they see it.
Yes, but one thing I will say is you should never underestimate the creativity of a developer because I can
Mm-hmm.
imagine that developers could find a way to absolutely break this game, not in a
Yeah.
bad way, but change it completely and still be compatible with all the mods and DLC.
Yeah, I'm interested, and I'm genuinely interested in to see what the future holds. But right now, it's just a wait and see because no actual mods have come out for this yet. Nothing that isn't in house, and most likely according to what developers have told us, most of it's going to be in-house anyway, predicated on development milestones and things like that. So, I don't see modding going away anytime soon. I actually see modding that's going to get bigger and better in theory if this doesn't inspire a ton of people to hold back their ideas. That's my main concern, is that
Right.
because you cannot publish something that you can't retrofit a mod. They already said that. No one's going to take their magnum opus and put it on, the Nexus, because they don't want that to, they want to be able to market that idea to the Creation Club. So
Uh-huh.
that's a big problem as well. It may stifle creativity within the community on the more high profile developers.
Mhm. But yeah.
All right, so is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I'd say that just about covers it. I think the bottom line is what Bethesda does with their copyright and how much or how little they allow. I think that's the big takeaway from it.
And my takeaway, like my concerns are, again, will it limit creativity, and how much are these developers getting compensated? That's I want to know that if these people are actually going to be professional quality developers, that they're actually going to get paid professional quality rates. That's
Right.
but other than that, I think we're done with this topic. Thank you for sharing your insight as to the flight simulator community and how it parallels this situation. Lord Baldur, how can we find you and what you do?
All right, so my channel is Lord Baldur. Two names, Lord and Baldur, Baldur. People seem to mispronounce it, but if before anyone asks, yes, it was based off of Baldur's Gate
Mm-hmm.
game. But yeah, so I do flight simming, do a little bit of Doom because it's a kick-ass game, but mostly what I do is I do aircraft. I tend to be pretty knowledgeable on it, or at least I try to be. And yeah, for the most part, I try to simplify things, try to make people understand what goes on with aerodynamics of flight, and for the most part, I give my 2 cents on, hey, is this good or is this?
Okay. Well, I've been a big fan of Doom for a while. We should probably get you into a brutal Doom match at some point, just for the lulls.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. But I think that about wraps it up. Thank you all for watching, and do check out Lord Baldur's stuff. Until next time, y'all have a good one.